Welcome to the Content Podcast, conversations with Silicon Valley's creatives. I'm Daniel Garcia, your host and the cultivator of Content Magazine, published by SVCreates. This episode of the Content Magazine podcast is brought to you by Bonfire, a Silicon Valley digital agency building elevated websites for ambitious brands. Find out more about Bonfire at bonfire.com.
Hi, this is Connie.
Hey Connie, how you doing? This is Daniel.
Oh, Daniel, hi. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good to talk to you. I don't know if everyone makes out there in podcast land knows the connection, but you are technically my boss because Content Magazine is published by SVCreates.
That's right.
Yes, which is a total privilege and honor for me to be on staff. I have to say that up front so everybody out there can hear. And I just really appreciate you, and I love being a part of SVCreates.
Well, Daniel, I think Content Magazine brings such texture and connection to communities. So we are so delighted to have you and your team part of SVCreates.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's fun.
Yeah. So now you came through. You have a business degree is kind of like where you came from. You came into town from Colorado to work in Mountain View, right? And you were in city government, or what were you in Mountain View exactly?
Yeah.
What were you doing?
I was there for 6 years. In fact, it was my first local government experience and kind of baptism by fire. And yeah, so I certainly had experience in what local government does and the
Mm-hmm.
impact it can have on its community. It
Mm-hmm.
was a great run.
Yeah, and you went from there to the Children's Discovery Museum, correct?
I did. Well, actually, that's not true.
Oh.
I got recruited by Becky Morgan when she left the Senate, California Senate, to head up joint venture Silicon Valley. So she literally recruited me away from the city of Mountain View, and I spent about 7 years with joint venture, and then I also left to start a project in partnership with UC Santa Cruz, and that
Hmm.
was the opening of a center, an academic and research center in partnership with NASA Ames. So
Oh,
that
cool.
was before going to Children's Discovery Museum. And so Children's Discovery Museum was my first cultural institution, and I spent about 6, 7 years there. And while I was there, that was my first foray into the leadership role among cultural institutions.
Mm-hmm.
We were focused on downtown San Jose, and I ended up participating in and being part of the creation of First Act Silicon Valley. And the ACT stood for Arts, Creativity, and Technology.
Yeah.
And we were designed to be a 5 to 10 year organization that catalyzed change in our community, focused on arts, culture, and design.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, we invested and partnered with several local organizations. And one of them was Arts Council Silicon Valley.
Right.
And as a result of that partnership, when there was a leadership change and we were in the sunset mode of First Act, we ended up merging the two organizations, and that was in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And then we became SVCreates 1 year later. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the journey. I often refer to myself as the accidental arts leader
Yeah.
because
Right.
there's nothing really in my background that pointed me in that direction. But sometimes issues and community and circumstances choose you, and that's how I
Yeah.
sort of think about it. Um,
Yeah.
and applying what I would call my civic, entrepreneurial, and community strategist skill sets
Yeah.
to the challenges that a community faces. And
Mm-hmm.
in this case, I see arts as an important strategy for community building, placemaking, and several other things that we both care about.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. That's interesting that it wasn't necessarily your plan to be involved kind of like in arts and specifically in arts. I think you kind of were always kind of like doing cultural development and leadership because you were a part of also bringing Spur to San Jose as
Yeah,
well.
I would say civic leadership, Daniel,
Okay, civic.
as opposed to cultural leadership. That
Okay.
was my, my background. Whether it was at, you know, University of Colorado or California, Santa Cruz, or
Hmm.
Mountain View, and then the Children's Discovery Museum was the beginning of sort of being in a cultural leadership role,
Hmm. Okay.
and I haven't left it since.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So then, now recently, we've put together a publication about the business of arts and culture in Silicon Valley, and this actually isn't the first of this research. A couple of them have already happened, right? This is kind of
Yeah,
a
well,
follow up in a series, or how would you
yeah, well,
describe
we
it?
we have done 4 publications and inserts into the Silicon Valley Business Journal. So this is our 4th. It's our second that's focused really on articulating the profile, if you will, of our arts and culture ecosystem here in Silicon Valley,
Hmm.
and many of the issues that are challenging it, and hopeful that we're advancing in the future to address some of those challenges. But then there's just basic research about who we are and why we are the way we are.
Yeah, I mean, even this second insert that you did for the Business Journal on the arts and culture, you start out with a quote that says, "We're not in Kansas, and we never were." Right?
Yeah, we're not in Kansas
City
anymore, and we
more.
never
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Your take on Dorothy. So,
yeah.
what's from looking at the research and being in Silicon Valley made you kind of even come up with that kind of little quote to be in the
Yeah.
front page?
So, um, having studied this, 10 years ago, um, and then redoing the research, I guess what I would say is why that quote felt right is that, even though San Jose, as the city center of Silicon Valley, as the largest city, um, is I'm not sure if it's still the 10th largest city. Did I hear it's now the 11th?
Oh,
Did you?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't heard that
Anyway,
yet.
it's right up there. If you look at our history of this region, it really didn't grow up the same way that other cities in the United States did,
Mm-hmm.
and probably there's 2 significant distinguishing characteristics that make us different, and it's partly the speed at which we grew to national acclaim as the center of
Mm-hmm.
innovation and technology. So our basic DNA has that sort of entrepreneurial startup tech industry underpinning, and then because we grew to be that center of innovation, we've attracted people from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's both our technology sort of centric themed DNA plus the breadth of diversity that has attracted. And as a result of that, we don't follow the same patterns that other American cities have. Um, and so I'll give you a couple of examples. Um, because of the churn that's here and the breadth of diversity, what you
Mm-hmm.
would normally see as sort of a Eurocentric, cult, white culture dominated region in its arts, we never fully really reached that, not like
Mm-hmm.
other US cities. And so we are an ecosystem of broadly diverse and geographically distributed across
Mm-hmm.
our region. So we lean small. We also lean market. And by that, I mean, we haven't had the traditional funding mechanisms from what I would call the social elite who've
Mm-hmm.
often funded the arts in other regions. We never really had that. So we were funded more by the friends and families of this ecosystem, certainly government. And so as a result, we've had to be more entrepreneurial, and our earned income is higher and above the national average as opposed to the contributed. Um, And so those are some of the major differences. Nobody else looks quite like that, and it's kind of goes with the idea of the suburbs in some ways grew into the city, and that reinforced the broadly distributed or geographically distributed, and then the makeup of the people who are here don't necessarily look, or maybe we look like the future of the United States as opposed
Sure. Yeah.
to the past. And
Yeah.
so all of that influenced the differences of our ecosystem.
And what does that then pose specifically for the arts and culture sector? What kind of challenges does that make for this area then that's unique?
So resources are challenged.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, it's hard to get attention focused on the arts when 90% of the philanthropic giving in the region out leaves the region. So we're
Mm-hmm.
a valley of immigrants connected to someplace else.
Mm-hmm.
And so right out of the gate, there's only about 10% that actually focuses on Santa Clara County. So it's a smaller pot, even though we're abundantly wealthy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then because of I would say because of our engineering male dominated culture tied to Silicon Valley and its, global success, arts are not, you know, in the top priorities of for
Right.
giving at the individual, foundation, and or corporate level. So,
It's
getting
more
the
like
attention
the math and
and who,
science.
oh, I'm sorry, Daniel, what
It's
did you
it.
say?
It's more of the math and science kind of
Yeah,
gets the attention.
yeah. I mean, I think we do fund education and children, and so there is a segment that cares about arts education. But if you think about the priorities, I would say that they start probably at the education level. That's
Mm.
one of the highest priorities. But then, we are also have a diverse set of donors out there and philanthropists who are, maybe care about the environment or natural disasters. We certainly respond to those. And then I would say basic social needs, the social needs of our community, basic needs related to hunger and housing and transportation and all those issues that impact everybody, including the arts community.
Yeah. Do you think it? I mean, do you think there's a little bit of a? I guess it's kind of like a blindness in a way, not really seeing the significance of what the arts play in the development of a quality life and culture. Do you think it's kind of maybe taken a granted for or not noticed? Is that some of the things that are going on?
Yeah, I totally think the arts are taken for granted. And part of it, Daniel, I think, is that because we're so broadly diverse and there's not, a few organizations that are large and everyone rallies around.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and there can be a good thing for that. In other words, there's the breadth of diversity can be very good, but that
Yeah.
also sort of dissipates our energy and our engagement. And because we're small, I mean, the ecosystem organizations and artists are relatively low in numbers, that unless you're participating or engaging, we're somewhat invisible. And in other regions, you might have these very visible structures. I'm not saying we don't have some, but more so visible structures and galas and large organizations that sort of
Yeah.
dominate the news cycle, if you will. So because we don't have that, I think we're somewhat invisible. And then the value of our story, it's just like anything else. They have to hear it over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And the networked approach to doing that is dependent on the relationships one has. And so,
Mm-hmm.
in fact, Content Magazine was designed to raise the voice, as you know, of our creative culture. And it's hard to break through the noise out there, isn't
Yeah. Definitely.
it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess, so all those kind of circumstances, the really diverse community coming from multiple countries and cultures, coming to an area that wasn't really kind of rooted in one long-lasting kind of social elite, and then kind of boomed
Yeah.
with vast geographical area, throughout the Bay Area and the suburbs, kind of doesn't let that focus of identity be there, which is in some ways, right, is an advantage, right, to have
Yeah.
such diversity in so many smaller organizations, um, delivering very specific cultural arts experiences rather than the model of kind of like the rest of the United States in many ways, a lot of the other big cities, where it's kind of that Western Eurocentric established um, kind of arts. And here, like the ballet and even like some of the theater groups, and we're challenged. But we've seen an incredible increase though in arts organizations kind of spawn here, right?
Yeah, you know what, Daniel, it goes with our startup culture. So
Mm,
we grew 60% in the last 10 years, and who would have thought that that would be the case? Now, I should mention that we published, most of our data was before COVID,
yeah.
although the publication certainly highlights the dramatic and negative impacts of COVID
Mm-hmm.
on the arts. We were the first to close and the last to open.
Yeah.
So, but what you just described is very true. And I think the one thing too that we shouldn't underestimate is, our suburban development pattern separates us too.
Yeah.
And then you combine that with traffic challenges, certainly pre-COVID, and the idea of spending 2 hours on the freeway to get to an event,
Right.
that's a challenge, and it's both our transportation system and our suburban development pattern. So you're absolutely right. All of these factors, it's not just one, but we pride ourselves in the richness and the variety and the culturally specific organizations that
Mm-hmm.
fuel the souls of this diverse community
Yeah.
and deliver from a community development perspective tremendous value around
Yeah.
social cohesion and cross-cultural understanding, and
Yeah.
people who are engaged in a culturally specific organization and or art form or activity are deepening their attachment to this place and to each other. And
Yeah.
so it's not as if the other regions of the country don't have small and mid-sized groups, it's that we don't have any large, and they do.
Right.
And
Yeah.
as a result, as your earlier comment or question is that creates that invisibility, but it also creates in many ways a more equitable, or an opportunity for a more equitable and engaged community at the 10-foot level as opposed to the 30,000-foot level.
Yeah, yeah. And the great thing, right, is the opportunities for the citizens of this area to experience so many diverse cultural experiences, from folklorica to, Bollywood to taiko to rap to,
Yeah,
yeah, it's kind of interesting. But it
it
does,
is. And can I comment on that? Because I
yeah.
have, a lot of friends who will travel the world, including myself,
Mhm.
and enjoy these various cultural art forms
Yeah,
in other countries. And the truth is we have them here.
yeah,
They're at our fingertips. And so the globe is actually in our backyard.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, but I guess the struggle is, how are those organizations and those people making those offerings able to be sustained, and how do people find them and engage with them to become participants? I guess that's some of the questions that I know you are working on, and some of the things that you're doing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we
So
are.
what do you think is what was the real, like, what's the goal of the research? So doing, the business of arts and culture, what do you think is the, what's the goal, the reason for doing it, this
Yeah,
research?
so I would put it everything, all my answers kind of into four four buckets, four answers. And the first is at SVCreates is to inform our work.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, Daniel, we kind of positioned ourselves as venture culturists.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that role, we are stewards of a portfolio of arts organizations and artists. And we provide, various tools to build the capacity of organizations and grants and coaching and so on
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. So as an organization that's focused on helping the ecosystem, it made sense for us to be very knowledgeable about who we're trying to serve, and
Yeah.
that then informs our work, our strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read the document, you'll see how the research actually not only informed it 10 years ago, but will continue to inform it moving forward. The second is that we wanted the ecosystem itself and its leadership and their boards and their donors, their family and friends to understand the ecosystem in a way that we do. And
Mm-hmm.
so to share that knowledge and understanding as a foundation for the third, which is I think a shared language is powerful. So when we start using some of the same language about ourselves and how we describe ourselves and our strengths and our value, it helps to build not only the um, power of the story, but also it's foundational to creating coalitions and coming
Mm-hmm.
together. And so that would be the third. And then lastly, which is really ultimately all of our goals, is that we want to bring more resources to this ecosystem. And that
Mm-hmm.
requires partners um, and data. I do want to say something about data. We live in a data junkie kind of region. And so data is important. But I also believe that data itself doesn't produce investment from the community, from individuals and corporations or foundations, but it's mixed with the storytelling and the value that we bring, and quite frankly, appealing to the heart and soul of our region. So we use the research maybe as a entry point, a starting point
Mm-hmm.
conversation, but it's so much more than the data that needs to be shared with the community that we serve.
Yeah. Yeah. The data definitely makes the playing field to tell the story that really captures the vision of your heart, right? I mean,
Yeah, that's
it's the
right.
yeah, it's kind of that the heart and the head together.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
what is some of the language then? What's some of the kind of like collective language that you would have gotten out of this research, or you're thinking of as you describe this area then that might coalesce people?
Yeah, I think that there's a chart in there. You may remember it's the one. Oh, by the way, we haven't said this yet.
No, we don't
Daniel,
need to
you're
say
the
this.
designer of this insert and did
No,
such
no,
a
no, no.
beautiful job.
That we don't need to do that though.
So I think what I would do is sort of share some of the headlines from the chart that describes, the difference between the 20th century industrial economy and the arts,
Yeah.
the role the arts played with that versus the 21st century. So if you think back into the a more traditional view of the arts, it was very hierarchical. And
Mm-hmm.
so we are entrepreneurial. So that's some of the language.
Mm-hmm.
There were prominent structures, yeah, of the 20th century. So the physical and prominent structures dominated, where the 21st century is more decentralized creative spaces, and that you see, it's not like you go to one place or one performing arts center to figure out what's going on artistically in our region. um, 20th century had a lot about observing art. It's what artists you know
Yeah.
said to you, delivered to you. And Silicon Valley and our ecosystem is much more about creative expression,
Yeah.
centralized power versus people power. I see our ecosystem is closer to the ground, so we want to underscore that.
Hmm.
We already talked about social elitism isn't our strength or our history. It's more about inclusivity
Hmm.
and status was the goal in the 20th century for some who invested in the arts, and for us, it's more about cultural identity. And then one of my favorites is ex relevance trumps excellence,
Yeah. Yeah.
knowing that quality is always relevant and
Hmm.
often relative. And so that really, I think, speaks to the breadth of our diversity. And so what is precious and or enjoyable to one isn't necessarily to another. And that's a
Yeah.
good thing when relevance is the driver. So I
Yeah.
don't know if that
No,
captured
that
what I'm hoping I would say around the language, but that's kind of it.
yeah, no, that's good. I think that's exactly, to try to see what kind of thoughts and words that we are using as a community to kind of describe who we are. And for those who do pick up the publication of the research for the business of arts and culture, they can find that on page 4. I happen to have it right here in front of me. Yeah. So, what do you think? So now you did the research. You've done similar research before. Well, actually, who's some of the partners to help with this research? Who kind of are
Yeah,
some of the partners? Yeah.
let's give a shout out for the Packard Foundation.
Hmm.
They were a huge supporter. And then they were joined by Silicon Valley Community Foundation and the Office of Cultural Affairs
Hmm.
in the city of San Jose.
Yeah.
Our hope is that we will not wait another 10 years to
Yeah.
do this study again, but we'd like to get in a rhythm of every 5 years. We're we're experimenting and exploring the idea of having some annual index, which might
Okay.
be a subset of the data tracked on an annual basis,
Hmm.
along with um, some study, if you will, of some specific issue that
Yeah.
is important. So we're exploring that, and you'll see that play out in the coming years. Um, and so um,
Yeah.
was that it? I forget what you
Yeah. Yeah.
asked me
No,
now.
you kind of went down a different track, but it's okay. So, what would you say for doing the research 10 years ago and then doing it now? What was something for you that was, yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna put a parenthetical thing here because I don't think necessarily you were just surprised because it seems pretty consistent. But was there any findings in it that let's do this. One, that maybe surprised you a little bit from 10 years ago. And then two, what is a finding that you think is important to highlight?
Let me start with the important to highlight, and that is that we're actually more reflective of the ecosystem is more reflective of the community we serve today than it was 10
Yeah.
years ago. So we've
Hmm.
grown into our that more culturally specific, broadly diverse um, ecosystem reflective of our citizens. So that's a good thing, I believe. I
Hmm.
think the surprise for me, I already kind of alluded to it, is that we grew as much as we did. So, we grew from over 600 501c3 nonprofits to over 1,000.
Hmm.
And during that time, the culturally specific organizations grew as well, and the Eurocentric, traditional
Yeah.
Western contracted.
Yeah.
The other segment that grew, Daniel, was the tech centric um,
Mm.
industry. So that was interesting, not so surprising, but it was interesting to see how it kind of showed up in the research.
Yeah.
And so that was that. I think that's probably what I would point to.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a growth of, I think it was like 57% of more cultural relevant or
Yeah,
culturally organizations than kind of like the traditional
that's right. The
Eurocentric. Yeah.
culturally
Yeah.
specific.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. I mean, to see that even out is one is even the Eurocentric is shrinking while the other side is actually growing. I think it was I I forget what, like 5 times or something like that. It was like
Yeah.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. What may not be obvious in the document, but I think it's worth noting, is that the order of magnitude difference um, from some of our other cities.
Mm,
So, the traditional Western symphony, opera, ballet. And by the way, none of my comments are judgmental in terms of quality. It's more about its fit in our
yeah.
region. So when we talk about a large organization, and we compare it to other cities. I mean, we have you know, our opera is about between 4 and 5 million,
Hmm.
and large American cities operas run from 75 to over 100 million. So
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
order of magnitude, and it's significant. So they never took root, and by the way, they didn't survive here.
Yeah.
As you
Yeah.
know, the ballet closed, and now we have a new ballet. The symphony, that that closed many years ago, and it was rebirthed as a guest conductor model
Hmm.
symphony. Our theater, our regional theater, um, did not make it. Um, and our American Musical Theater did not as well. So a lot of those Western traditions, they just didn't have the business model that and the resources or support from the local community to continue. And
Yeah.
so that's part of why we look more like who we are. I mean, our citizens, as opposed to the traditional arts ecosystem in other major cities.
Yeah. So then, what for you then? What was for you on a personal level? Were you somewhat surprised from the findings? Was there anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think I already answered that by saying I was surprised personally about the the, the dramatic growth
Okay.
especially in the culturally specific, because once again, if you're not engaged, you don't know, you don't see it. And I used this example the other day, and you're familiar with my little story where I was in a play for a local Chinese community theater, and we had 4 performances, and
Hmm.
every single one of them was sold out. So it wasn't an issue of not having audience,
Right.
but it was 99.9% Chinese that
Hmm.
attended it. So that community is well aware, but if you're not part of that community, how would you know about it?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think what if you multiply that by hundreds, that's part of who we are.
Yeah.
That's who our arts ecosystem is.
Yeah. What what do you see being the implications of this research for specifically for artists and for the creative community?
Yeah, I think what it demonstrates, Daniel, is that it demonstrates or articulates what we all already know.
Hmm.
This is a really hard region to live and work in, especially if you're not part of the technology cluster industries that are here. So
Yeah.
it demonstrates that. So I don't think that's necessarily an encouraging message, because I don't believe that um, the basic economic drivers are going to change. That said, um, my hope is that by having these conversations and building coalitions, that we are able to move some needles.
Yeah.
And part of that is tied to more resources,
Hmm.
both at the government level and the foundation level, and hopefully at the individual level as well. And that
Hmm.
the data provides a backdrop for these conversations, whether it's organizations, essentially launching their individual fundraising campaigns, or attracting new board members, that this becomes part of the story that is told, and as part of those recruitment strategies. Um, Donors, as we said earlier, I think giving it the context So organizations and or artists having the context in which they live and work, and in some cases sell their art. If you're an individual artist, it's
Yeah.
important for you to know sort of the lay of the land. Some things can be changed and some things can't. So it's learning to navigate the valley we live in, not the valley we wish we lived in.
Yeah.
And so there's sort of a reality check. And then there's also this general feeling of pride that I'd like our ecosystem leaders to feel, as well as civic leaders, of the pride in the arts, vibrant arts ecosystem we have,
Yeah. Yeah.
which that kind of is laid out there.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully that it becomes a catalyst for more investment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, we talk about kind of like the pride, um, and the uniqueness of our kind of surroundings. I think there is a sense of great pride because of the diversity. And yet, because of where we live, the struggle it is, I think, to be uh, a like a income making, building, sustainable artist in this community with
Oh yeah,
with the prices of real estate and the cost of living.
yeah,
Um, so in some ways, that's discouraging. But like even for me, like reading through the research, it kind of is encouraging to know like, okay, well, wait a second, is like maybe this region and what we're doing even with the magazine, it's not going to be funded or purchased or even have the audience that you would see like in some other country or another city. So it's okay to do this for this community and create this work for this community, and knowing that it can't, you can't be what this region isn't. So how would you speak on those kind of ideas that I'm kind of throwing out there?
I agree with you, Daniel. And part of it is being comfortable in our own skin
Yeah.
and being proud of it. A lot of people will, emphasize, we're south of San Francisco, and we're in their shadow. I don't see it that way. I see San Francisco and Oakland as very different places within our larger Bay Area,
Yeah.
and we feed. We have different roles. Our each ecosystem is different, and so that goes back to the sort of feeling comfortable in your own skin, but also accepting the realities.
Yeah.
Um, I'm a big believer that Silicon Valley isn't for everyone. And for those of us who've chosen to live there and stay there, it's like, how do we make the most of what we have,
Mm-hmm.
and serve the community that's here? And, there isn't a single region in the country whose arts leadership will say they have enough money.
Yeah.
Not a
Yeah.
single one.
Yeah.
When I grew up, as you know, in Minnesota, and St. Paul, Minneapolis area, I think it is the number one per capita investor in the arts. And
Mm.
I've talked to their leadership, and we need more money. We need more money.
Yeah.
So that's a common theme everywhere. And I
Yeah.
think that part of our challenge and our opportunity is to navigate the wealth that's here, engage those who might be able to increase our resources, but also accepting the reality of the situation. When you have a broadly diverse ecosystem like we do, you're
Yeah.
not going to attract everyone and to rally around, one arts organization or one culture or one
Yeah.
campaign. So we have to
Yeah.
do things differently. We have to learn how to survive and navigate, and of course we all love the word thrive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Coming out of COVID, it's hard to sort of hear these messages because things have been so challenging, and yet I'd say the most optimistic message I could leave you with is that it has really built um, a closeness and cohesion, if you will, among the arts leadership. And I think
Yeah.
coalition building has been really positive, and I think it will bear fruit. And it has, and it will continue.
Yeah. 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 It is. The reality check is, it's not easy to be an artist anywhere in the world.
No.
There's very few that make their riches, by being artists. And even the artists that we would declare even today as being the great, rich, famous artists were poor for most of their life. But we don't want that to happen. We want people to be able to have a living and help move that needle forward. And that's what I appreciate what we do with SVCreates and what you're doing with your leadership, Connie, and even for the publication of the business and arts and culture, just to kind of demonstrate all these kind of nuances.
Yeah, and one thing we haven't really talked about, and I think it
Yeah.
bears repeating from the insert, is that the value here, clearly there's economic value, but in a region that has such a strong, economy that's not tied directly to the arts,
Mm-hmm.
harder to make that case. But what we do for small business is really important
Mm-hmm.
in terms of restaurants and, you know, all the way down to parking lots and childcare.
Yeah.
Um, and and the role that we play in improving the health and well-being of our citizenry.
Yeah.
Um, if people don't feel connected to the place they live, they're not going to invest in it. So I believe the arts plays a really important role in deepening that attachment. So that then equates to environmental stewardship and philanthropy, etc. And we haven't talked about skill building for our youth. It's
Right. Right.
incredibly important. Um, and all of the studies that have been done show, though children who are involved in the arts perform better in school. And then
Mm-hmm.
lastly, but not insignificantly, is the role arts play in driving social change
Mm-hmm.
and holding those courageous conversations about our community. And we can do that in a trusted sort of way because those who engage in the arts have a special bond and kindred spirit. So I think we're in a position to drive social change in ways that other sectors cannot.
Yeah. And even the health and welfare, I mean, the health aspect of it
Yes.
and personal welfare is
Oh,
that
yes.
what the arts do. And I even like in the beginning when you're setting the stage in the publication that imagine going through COVID without the arts. And I
I
think
know.
that's the problem. Is sometimes we think about arts, we forget that that documentary that you're watching, that film that you're watching, that music that you're listening to, that 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 poster, mural,
Mural.
all those kind
Yeah,
of things are giving expression and is done from the creative community and helps us heal and connect and move culture forward, right?
that's right, Daniel. Beautifully said. It's a
Well,
great
thank you.
close. It's a
Well, then
great
have to,
close.
yeah, we'll have to end on that then. Me quoting
Absolutely.
you is a great quote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Connie. I really appreciate you taking time to talk about this. And then, if people want to get their hands on the publication about the business of arts and culture, I mean, they can go to the SV Creates website. We have links there. They can go to even links off our website, the content magazine. How about to get up? Do we have any more of the actual physical publications? Maybe if somebody wanted to
We
get a
do.
copy.
If people need to have a physical copy, we can get them a copy.
Okay.
The Business Journal generously gave us several hundred, and we're making the rounds. We're
Yeah.
planning to make several presentations to business groups and civic organizations and government as well. And
Hmm.
so you have more than one way to access the document, but we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. So go ahead and email Connie.
There you
you
go.
can you can reach out to me, and I will make sure everybody gets a copy of it. So thank you, Connie, and I hope to see. I'll probably see you in Zoom before I see you in person.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing each other at least once a week in Zoom.
Yeah.
So I look
Yeah.
forward. In fact, the next one's tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
I know.
See you then.
Just a few hours from now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Connie, and
Okay.
I'll talk to you later.
Thank you,
Thanks.
Daniel.
Bye. For the full research that's in the publication, The Business of Arts and Culture, go to SV Creates website at svcreates.org. Thank you for listening to the Content Magazine podcast. Follow us on social media at Content Mag. Visit our website to become a member and help us to continue to tell the stories of the local creatives. This episode's music is Tang by Chris Inman, who is featured in issue 13.2. Follow him on Spotify at Chris Inman and on Instagram at chris.inman, as well as his record label, Orange Label Records.